Martin Scorsese's The Irishman has screened for the first time. The film made its world debut yesterday at the New York Film Festival, and reviews are pouring out. That means, yes, there are people walking amongst you and I who have seen this much anticipated picture. I wanted to take a look at some of the reviews with no spoilers and see what all the critics are saying about the film. Now, before we begin, I do want to point out two things. One, that when a new movie comes out, there are always glowing reviews after the premiere. I've heard some utterly terrible films called the best movies of the year, and it's only after the film is released to general audiences and the review embargoes lift that you see what people are really thinking about the movie. The second thing I wanted to say is that it really is a good idea to go into a film with high expectations. Despite what other people are saying, if you go in with such lofty hopes, you might set an impossible standard for the film that, when it fails to reach the unimaginable heights you've set for it, you end up disappointed, even if it is a good film. So I would say, moderate your expectations when watching The Irishman. Take a moment before you watch it to calm yourself down so that the film has a fair chance. Now, with that being said, it has to be mentioned that the overall consensus of The Irishman is exceptionally high. I'm hearing the word masterpiece thrown around for the film, the word comeback for the main cast, and business as usual for Scorsese, who it seems has delivered yet another knockout film. At the time of this video, the movie has a 100% score on Rotten Tomatoes with 30 reviews, and its Metacritic score is a brilliant 92 out of 100 from 20 critics, being called a must-see movie. I have yet to see anyone say it is a bad film. There are some things pointed out, like one or two critics have said it's too long, which to me is bizarre, as how can a Scorsese film starring Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Joe Pesci and Harvey Keitel ever be called too long? And if you've read the book, you'll know that there is so much detail, so many things that happen, that you can make an argument that the film is too short. And there are a few other complaints as well, some really silly ones, like the film doesn't have any strong female characters, as if the filmmakers are supposed to invent some. And a few have pointed out that the CGI can be distracting. But most have said the film was an incredible experience and one of Scorsese's very best. So let's see what the critics are saying. Eric Conn of IndieWise said, De Niro's always at his best in the context of a Scorsese-mandated tough guy routine, and Frank Sheeran gives the actor his most satisfying lead role in years. Sheeran appears in virtually every scene, and the story belongs to his colourful worldview the entire time. He may be an aging man telling tall tales, but that puts him in the same category as the one behind the camera. Sheeran, however, lost touch with his world long before he left it. With The Irishman, Scorsese proves he's more alive than ever. David Rooney of The Hollywood Reporter said, despite the movie's many pleasures and Scorsese's redoubtable directorial finesse, the excessive length ultimately is a weakness. Attempts to build in social context during the Kennedy and Nixon years, at times intercutting news footage from the period, aren't substantial enough to add much in terms of texture. The connections drawn between politics and organised crime feels undernourished, and the movie works best when it remains tightly focused on the three central figures of Frank, Russell and Jimmy. Netflix should be commended for providing one of our most celebrated filmmakers the opportunity to revisit narrative turf adjacent to some of his best movies, but the feeling remains that the material would have been better served by losing an hour or more to run at standard feature length, or bulking up on supporting characters and plot details to flesh out a series. Owen Gleiberman of Variety said, Martin Scorsese's The Irishman is a coldly enthralling, long-form knockout, a majestic mob picture with ice in its veins. It's the film that I think a lot of us wanted to see from Scorsese, a stately, ominous, suck-in-your-breath summing up not just a drama but a reckoning, a vision of the criminal underworld that's rippling with echoes of the director's previous mob films, but that also takes us someplace bold and new. Richard Lawson of Vanity Fair said, and the big-ticket world premiere at this festival is its opening night film, The Irishman, a nearly 3.5-hour gangster epic from New York's own hero, Martin Scorsese. The Irishman is less literal about its meta-moodiness than Pain and Glory is, but it still speaks disarming quiet volumes about what the autumn of life means for its creator. Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian said, "For much of its duration, The Irishman covers familiar ground but is sickly entertaining, if a little repetitive in the third hour. There's an almost meta-maturity, as if Scorsese is also looking back on his own career, the film leaving us with a haunting reminder not to glamorize violent men and the wreckage they leave behind." Joe Blessing of The Playlist said, "Ultimately, The Irishman is a major success for Scorsese. Not only does it incorporate the best aspects of his past crime dramas and their thrilling energy, but it adds context to those films and wrestles with their legacy resonantly. In a way, The Irishman fills in the gaps between Goodfellas and Casino to tell the overall story of the mob's rise and fall in post-war America, but it does so while anchored to one man's story and morality. The law never catches up to Sheeran, not for the real damning stuff anyway. But as Scorsese demonstrates with profound solemnity, he cannot outrun his conscience." Joshua Rothkopf of Time Out said, "Nothing this misshapen ever flies. Scorsese once managed to make a movie called The Aviator that was similarly overburdened, yet his all-over-the-place enthusiasm plays nicely against the material's death stench. Tidy as it may be to expect, Scorsese doesn't need to cap his career with a sign-off to the gangster epic. That would be way too sentimental for him. What The Irishman does become, in its final hour, is something better, a film about broken trust. De Niro's Sheeran, like the monks of Scorsese's magnificent silence, wrecked by spiritual compromise, can't express his pain. This may not be why the average fan comes to a Marty movie, but it's the statement this director, now 76, feels like making. And after so much brilliance, Scorsese is being too hard on himself. Maybe this review is too, but when The Irishman is about doubt, it's as personal as it gets." Mike Ryan of Uprocks said, "People will want to see The Irishman because of De Niro, Pesci and Pacino all in a mob movie again, directed by Martin Scorsese. And boy, yes, that's there. In the scenes when they are younger, the de-aging is pretty good. I'd say the best I've seen so far. But it's one of those things that if you stare at it, you can see the imperfections, especially when De Niro or Pesci are acting alongside, say, a non-de-aged Ray Romano. But you do get used to it. And the way I look at this is, well, this is a small price to pay to get all these actors together again to tell this story. To star in Martin Scorsese's phenomenal film about the price we all pay for our sins of youth, even if you or I didn't kill Jimmy Hoffa. The Irishman is terrific, and Netflix got their money's worth." A. Dowd, again of Uprocks, said, "As much as they take special care to tell audiences that their characters are rotten to the core, Goodfellas and Casino and another spiritual relative, The Wolf of Wall Street, have been misunderstood as glorifications. It's an inevitable consequence, perhaps, of following ugly men with occasionally glamorous lives. Scorsese takes no such chances with The Irishman, a crime epic that pushes further forward in time than most to a truly ignoble end. Eventually, it reminds us we're all just fitting ourselves for coffins." Karen James of the BBC said, "The film, at 3 hours and 19 minutes, never flags. The Irishman may not be as groundbreaking as Mean Streets or Taxi Driver, but then again, what is?" Karen Han of Polygon said, "Scorsese is so adept at storytelling, and his cast is so unbelievable that the film, which clocks in at 209 minutes, even longer than Return of the King and Avengers Endgame, barely feels its length. The Irishman feels more like being caught in a dream or reminiscence, with all the tenderness we're willing to afford in those in-between hours. Only Scorsese and his ensembled cast, not to mention long-time editor Thelma Schoonmaker, could bring that all into reality." Chris Evangelista of Film said, "Some may balk at the 209-minute runtime, but there's never a moment where this story drags. Indeed, the 3+ hours practically fly by because we're so swept up in this decades-long journey. There's not a single second wasted here because one gets the sense that all the characters are hanging on for dear life, literally. As the years tick on and their bodies fail them, The Irishman's main players find themselves closer and closer to oblivion. Johnny Oleksinski of the New York Post said, 5 decades is a lot of history to hold together, and it could have easily crumbled. Remember Gotti? But Scorsese is at the top of his game here. His film is never boring, and it explores some unexpectedly deep themes for mafiosos. Keith Uhlich of Slant said, with The Irishman, director Martin Scorsese proves to be in an alluring funeral mood. Shia Vassar of Filmera said, there is no arguing that The Irishman is a masterpiece. It is Scorsese revisiting themes seen in his past work with new elements of excitement, despair, and wit. The great performances and incredible filmmaking make this fictionalized tale of Frank Sheeran a story to end the decade, one that has seen many changes within the film industry and hopefully introducing a new era of Martin Scorsese. Stephanie Zacharek of Time said, for the first 2.5 hours of its 3.5-hour runtime, The Irishman is clever and entertaining, to the point where you may think that's all it's going to be. But its last half hour is deeply moving in a way that creeps up on you, and it's then that you see what Scorsese was working towards all along. A.O. Scott of the New York Times said, a monument is a complicated thing. This one is big and solid, and also surprisingly, surpassably delicate. So clearly, it looks like the film is a success, and those who have been waiting for the movie for so long had good reason to anticipate it so heavily, and it's worth the wait. Now that the film is essentially out there, keep a lookout for theatres near you that will be screening the film. If not, it'll be Netflix for you when the film hits the streaming platform on November the 27th. Thanks for watching.